Good morning, Warbles on a lot here with the culture wars on the Outsiders, 3rd of April.
The idea that we were anything other than invaded, as you say, whether you take that on a legal footing or, for its ordinary meaning, when the understanding that we were settled as a country, which is legally we were, is itself based on a myth that there was no one here in the first place. So we're happy to go along with that myth, but then to have a public conversation about, well, were we invaded or not, is so uncomfortable for us.
Well, and that discomfort, I think that's the really interesting thing. I mean, Tim, we don't seem to have a way of having this conversation, of looking clear-eyed at our past, of trying to resolve that issue.
No, it's all still too raw. It's only 200 years old. And we can look back at the history of Britain, for example, and concede that William the Conqueror invaded Britain in 1066, and that sort of set up British society that most of Australia's population, I think, still
gave rise to Magna Carta and thus the Institute of Public Affairs.
Yeah. But yeah, it wasn't, as Emily says, it was an invasion, and there's no, you can't realistically explain it any other way. It's nothing different. Not Captain Cook, because he was actually the discoverer, but Philip and those who followed him.
Which is the interesting part about
taking over the land.
The outrage of those who seek so strenuously to defend a version of history don't even understand it themselves. But
what I also object to, though, Jonathan, frankly, is the way sometimes it's seen from the other side, and I don't quite understand Aboriginal Australians, particularly Aboriginal intellectuals, who sort of identify solely as, Invasion Day, when they are themselves the product of two cultures, one of which was brought to them through that invasion. It's a complicated thing, I know, and emotionally, I suppose it's you can understand why they identify solely with the Aboriginal side of their heritage. But a lot of these guys also have white heritage, and it does seem to me that they need to sort of embrace that in the same way that they embrace their Aboriginal heritage.
Well, and Aaron, to bring you in here too, I mean, the country has both, does it not? I mean, the country has the great achievements of European culture. The country also has the significant achievements and history of Indigenous culture, and yet we can't seem to marry those things into one entity.
Yeah, of course it does. Of course it does. And I thought Tim's point was pretty fascinating about this mixture of cultures. But to me, one of the really sad aspects about this is the right-wing populist media, which is out there, which creates these fissures in society or aggravates them, or tries to pull them apart.
Purely to create the division.
That's right, purely for its own.
They're fueling the very things that they say they're against.
Absolutely. And if there was ever an argument for the ABC, dare I say it, this is it. Bit of balance, okay? Don't agree with you all the time, Jonathan, but
Thank you, Aaron.
I think this is a good argument for you.
Well, it is a fascinating issue. In my personal sense of this issue is that it is a cornerstone thing for the country to really move forward. This has to achieve some sort of resolution.
There's so many raw issues there that always have to be confronted.
And I think it has to be said that there's the historical issues that we have to deal with, which have in turn fed into the issues which we're not talking about, because we're talking about the Daily Telegraph, which are things like the ridiculous rate of youth suicide in Indigenous cultures and rates of incarceration, and all the kind of whole myriad of issues which we ought to be
which go to alienation. Essentially.
All of it flows, though, I think, from begins to flow from that initial sense of understanding and acceptance.
But don't you think one of the great things about Aboriginal culture recently is the rise of Stan Grant, this really powerful voice? Yes. And I was seeing in the paper that his new book, I think, is number 1 or number 2 on the non-fiction bestseller list.
And a man, we have to leave this here because time is against us, but a man who ideologically can't be pinned, but who is a fascinating and clear voice. Maybe that's our future. Emily Mullane joined us, lawyer, policy advisor, PhD candidate. Aaron Patrick, deputy editor of the Australian Financial Review, author of Credlin & Co., And Tim Colbatch, former economics editor for The Age, author of Decamer, the liberal. That's in the Sunday Extra this week. We're back next week. At least I'm not. Sammy Shah will be. I'm away.
Okay. No Moondog. I notice. Sadly. Right. Well, I'm tempted to think that Malcolm Turnbull's offer to let the states raise their own income tax to pay for hospitals and schools a great leap back to the 1940s, because I'm pretty sure once upon a time the states used to raise the income tax and give money to the federal government to do things like defence and foreign affairs and stuff like that, such as we did back when we were a British Commonwealth domino. But during World War II, it was found that really kind of what mattered was, let's have one federal income tax system, and then the federal government can collect taxes from everybody, and then they can distribute money to the states, which they can then use for their roads and their hospitals and all of their services. So to decide that the Liberal Party doesn't want to be seen by its voter base as doing anything to increase taxes on corporations or to increase taxes on high income individuals or to close the tax loopholes that let high income individuals stash money tax free in their superannuation fund so they can have 2 overseas holidays every year when they retire instead of 1. It doesn't want to do anything to raise revenue. They're determined that they have to cut spending in order to make the budget balance, and they kind of got to do that because they're borrowing billions of dollars just to pay the interest on the money that Australia owes. They've got an ideological idea fixe that it's a bad idea to redistribute whatever wealth there is throughout the Commonwealth of Australia, such that, like people in Tasmania whose children emerge from high school, half of them can't read well enough to fill in their unemployment form. So there's a lot of unemployment and there's not many high income individuals. So if Tasmania was forced to run itself on the taxes it can squeeze out of its own economy, we would have a very second or third world existence for the Taswegians. The theory is Australia was supposed to be one country, and if you were having a mining boom in Western Australia or Queensland or New South Wales or Victoria or wherever it was, the people who make the most money pay the most tax. That's the whole friggin' idea of it. A progressive taxation system. Well, the Liberal Party doesn't want to do that. What they want to do is minimise the taxes for the high income individuals, for the corporations. They know that the masses and the working classes don't really actually make enough money to pay enough tax during their whole working lives to effectively cover themselves or amortise the hospital and nursing home care they're going to need at the end of their lives, let alone run their life as a pensioner based on the taxes they've paid. So they kind of have to raise corporate taxes, and they have to tax high income individuals more than they tax the humble postman or office worker who works for basic wages. So yeah, the Liberal Party and the National Party have come to the conclusion that basically we should feed the unemployed to the hungry. We should cut everybody off from any form of social security service or network that was designed to preserve the fabric of society. All of the measures to try and help Aborigines to live on their tribal land, that's all been cut off because that's seen as a lifestyle choice by the Liberals. The idea that an Aborigine should be able to make a claim that a site is a sacred site for tribal, spiritual, religious reasons That's been kind of shot down in Western Australia, because unless they've got a cathedral there and there are people who go to the cathedral regularly holding services, it's not recognised as being a sacred site under the West Australian government these days. The idea that the White Blindfold political camp is getting upset at the fact that people like myself, who were raised to believe that Captain Cook discovered Australia and that Arthur Phillip brought the first fleet and that Australia was first settled in 1788, we're getting our heads around the idea that, well, actually, people have been living right here where I'm sitting for 40,000 years or so, kind of thing. That they had this place organised as a food forest. You had to maintain it by burning the right part of it at the right time and never staying too long in any one place so you didn't overgraze. Because humans used to be gatherers, 85% of the diet came from the food plants and the taste and the grease came from the hunting. The whole idea of the hunting was to give you some taste and grease, and it got the men out of the camp and out from being underfoot where the women were raising the little babies. You know how long it takes to make a boomerang, and then if you lose it, it goes back to being a stick. But anyway, it took 2 hours of work per person per day around here to furnish all the one's food, shelter, clothing needs. The rest of the day was free to do whatever you want. Philosophy, religion, play games, talk to one another, look at the landscape, observe it. And everybody got to keep everything that they made that was theirs, and anything that they hunted or they gathered, they gave away 9/10 of what they brought in. So no matter how bad a person's day was from sickness, infirmity, or just bad luck, nobody went to bed hungry. Now we have people working 8 or 10 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, giving away 30 or 40% of everything they make plus GST, and somebody goes to bed hungry every day. And everything that's been touched by European colonisation in Australia, everything they've touched, they've made a mess of. They fed the human food plants to their livestock. They cut down the trees and therefore cut the rainfall. They put the topsoil at the bottom of the rivers after they caught all the fish in the rivers and caught all the fish in the ocean. They then used what muddy water was left to irrigate the landscape and thus salinate what was left of the subsoil after they eroded the topsoil. They let loose cats and rabbits and foxes and cane toads and prickly pear and all manner of pestilential vermin on the landscape. And you get some raw prawn with a cooked head like Alan Jones, who says, oh, it's terrible to describe what happened in Australia in 1788 as being an invasion. Of course it was a fucking invasion. As to why people who've got just a tiny weeny little bit of Aboriginal DNA tend to identify with the Aboriginal view of history rather than, the white blindfold, it's the black armband sort of thing. Well, that's pretty much because that little bit of DNA, it resonates with the previous 40,000 years worth of living on the landscape and being constructed from molecules of the landscape. The white European, Asian, American, African, whatever it is, imported chunk of the DNA, it just doesn't resonate with the landscape, disconnected from the life force. Hoop-de-doo, 7 times every generation they move. Ciao.